Hello friends, and welcome to a brand new camera comparison between the iPhone 14 and last year's iPhone 13 Pro. Right now we are recording at 4K at 30 frames per second. Tell me in the comment section below if you see any differences or if they are actually the same. We start this comparison with some samples from their main cameras, but first I just wanted to clarify the testing process. All of the upcoming daylight pictures are taken in auto mode without adjusting any of the settings. Since they share the same chip and the same main camera, pictures taken with them are basically identical. They are so similar to each other that I always had to double check if I had made any mistakes. But no, they are really similar. This isn't a bad thing at all, since the iPhone 13 Pro did always impress me with its main camera, and the same case is now even with the iPhone 14. In some samples like here I was able to notice slight differences in colors, but those were so tiny they aren't even worth mentioning. Overall, their main cameras take some of the best pictures in daylight, and I think whichever one you pick you will be happy since both of them are really good. They both have ultrawide cameras, and although the sensors are now different, the results continue to be similar. I take pictures at the same time with both phones in my hands, and maybe this is also a reason why they are so similar. This wasn't always the case, however, since I was able to notice an improvement with the iPhone 14. When testing their HDR capabilities, I noticed that the newer iPhone does a slightly better job with maintaining the sky. When we crop in these images, you can see the 13 Pro crushed the clouds entirely, while the 14 is doing better. Those were rare scenarios, since most of the time they didn't differ from each other that much. The ultra-wide camera of the 13 Pro was already one of the best, and truly speaking the 14 despite being weaker on paper is just as good. At least in daylight it doesn't seem that the 14 is inferior compared to the 13 Pro. I expected them to be similar but not so much. Where you will find differences in favor of last year's 13 Pro is at zoom. Thanks to its 3x telephoto camera, the 3x does a much better job compared to the 14 at this zoom range. The new iPhone is starting to lose quality, while its predecessor is very sharp, and if you can't see the difference, here are those shots cropped in. The difference is now noticeable, and if the telephoto camera is necessary for you, then the 13 Pro should be your choice. Another area where the 13 Pro wins against the 14 is with macro pictures. That's because the ultra-wide camera of the Pro has autofocus, and it can take some really amazing macro pictures. Honestly, I don't take macro pictures at all, but it would have been nice to see this feature make its way to the 14. I guess they just wanted to differentiate the ultra-wide at something, since with landscapes they are similar. They both take portraits with their main cameras, and to no one's surprise they continue to be similar if not identical. iPhones have always been amazing for taking portraits, and these two are no different. The 13 Pro can also take portraits with its telephoto camera, while if we adjust the camera of the 14 at almost the same angle, it looks similar to the 13 Pro. The 13 Pro has a better perspective, but the 14 is doing a better job with edge detection, and this was actually a surprise to me since the Pro has the LiDAR scanner. When it comes to portraits with their front cameras, both continue to be amazing with the subject. Her face is natural and very detailed on both, but the sky is actually better preserved on the new iPhone 14. For you this might not be a big deal, but it's always good to see improvements. So what about selfies without portraits enabled? Well, I don't want to repeat myself, but they continue to be almost identical. The 14 has a new sensor, but at least in daylight it doesn't seem to be that much better. There were cases where the HDR is slightly better on the 14, but just like before I look identical on both devices. So if you were expecting more differences, sadly in daylight they almost don't exist. When recording with their main cameras, both are really amazing. The iPhone 14 has the second gen sensor shift stabilization, but let's be real, the 13 Pro was already the best when it came to videos, so I don't see any improvements here, besides maybe the action mode. Even when recording with their ultra-wide cameras they are very similar. They have different sensors, but the calibration Apple does to videos is identical. At 3x you can see the difference in sharpness. Obviously the 13 Pro is sharper, but I noticed that the 14 is actually more stable, since it crops in from its main camera. Still, I prefer the 13 Pro because I like how versatile its cameras are. Moving to low light, and from now on every picture is taken with night mode enabled on automatic seconds. With their front cameras, just like in daylight, the 14 seems to be just so slightly better with my face. And also the background seems to be more in check compared to the 13 Pro. The difference, however, was minimal in almost every scene, and even though I prefer the 14, the 13 Pro isn't bad either. I saw some improvements with the night mode of the 14, but this shouldn't be a factor at all. With their main cameras, in some samples, surprisingly they produce different results. For example, here the 14 has a cooler tone, while the 13 Pro is warmer. Personally, I like them both, and it is a matter of taste which one you prefer. Those were rare cases, since in many scenes I wasn't able to see any differences at all. The shooting time was almost identical in both phones, and in many samples they took around 1 or 2 seconds to take the pictures. Lens flare continues to be present with the iPhone 14 just like with every iPhone that came before, so with the main camera at least, I don't see improvements at all. Although it has a lot of shortcomings, I always loved the main camera of the 13 Pro for taking pictures at night, since they always had pleasing colors. The same story continues with the iPhone 14, even though I expected more. It is better than most of the Android competition, but identical when it comes to last year's Pro iPhones. When taking pictures with the ultrawide cameras, the iPhone 13 Pro is actually better. It has a larger sensor, so of course it outperforms the 14, which has the same sensor as the regular 13 of last year. That wasn't the case every time, since in places with a lot of light they were neck and neck to each other. But in places where the light sources weren't as present, the 13 Pro took brighter and more detailed pictures. For example, in this case the trees, the sky and even the ground are more visible on the 13 Pro. Overall, the ultra-wide camera of the 13 Pro is better than the one found on the regular 14 in low light. It just makes darker areas more visible, like here for example. The 14 on the other hand is almost just as good, so you shouldn't worry at all. At 3x there is no competition. The 13 Pro is sharper and much better compared to the noisy picture of the 14. The difference here is huge. It is worth mentioning that the telephoto camera of the 13 Pro gets activated in almost every scene, and I am happy since I really hate when phones zoom in with their main cameras, despite having dedicated telephoto sensors. When it comes to portraits in low light with the 13 Pro, you can take them with night mode enabled, while the 14 doesn't have this feature. Realistically speaking, this makes almost no difference at all. So guys, what do you think? Let me know which one was your winner. To me they were similar, but the 13 Pro has the advantage of macro and optical zoom at 3x. If you did enjoy this video, a thumbs up would be appreciated. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.